In this video, I will attempt to make a thought experiment. I will try to explain and to interpret the meaning and the history of the white race and the tragedy and the evil and the greatness of white Europeans throughout history. And I will make an introspection, and I will speak what this empirical individual that you see thinks, and I will try to be honest. So in this video, I speak as an empirical individual and I express my own personal thoughts. As an empirical individual, let us begin with beauty. My personal tastes in terms of beauty the most beautiful women in the view of my empirical self are Nordic Western European women. If I had to give names, Avril Lavigne, Emma Watson, Katy Perry, and even Lady Gaga, I find her very attractive. And Natalie Portman, although she's Jewish, she looks like a European woman. And Hayley Williams, for me, they are the embodiment of Aryan beauty, and a part of me loves this type of beauty more than anything else, and to love something more than something else is, in the realm of speculation, the principle of evil, because you reject that which you love less, and you separate and you negate, and you leave aside and you abandon, and you. So for me, the standard of beauty in terms of women is Aryan, in a sense of Nordic Western beauty. I speak as an empirical individual. I am ruthlessly honest. And the strictly Nordic women, the kind of women that one finds in Scandinavia, I acknowledge that they may be beautiful, but they are too perfect. The ideal of the blonde and blue-eyed perfection of Scandinavia, it leaves me, I acknowledge the beauty, but it leaves me kind of cold. I don't know how to express it, but the Western Nordic, the ideal type of beauty is the American woman, white, in my view, white American woman, or Anglo-Saxon. And we also find these kind of women in Germany partly, and in the Netherlands, and in France also. But my ideal type of beauty for women in the realm of my empirical self is the mixture of Nordic Western female white beauty that we find in England, America, Australia, South Africa. So they are, I know, from a biological and socio-biological standpoint, they are a mixture of Western Europeans and Nordic Europeans. So this is, for me, the most beautiful women. And I will try to detach myself from my empirical tastes. These type of women, and for me the absolute beauty is Emma Watson, but yeah. It is not only my tastes, because people overall, they love these type of beautiful women. Whether they are white or non-white, whether they are Nordic Western or Aryan or Alpine or Mediterranean, to speak like a racial anthropologist of the early 20th century, it is broadly acknowledged that this standard of beauty is the more appreciated. And I will be ruthlessly honest. When you watch pornography, most women in pornography are Nordic, Western, white Europeans. And these are the videos which are the most watched by the international pornographic community, if one might speak of. So, yeah. And then, in the realm of art, then again, I will be honest, for me the superiority, the supreme form of art is classical Greek art. The Greek sculptures of classical antiquity of 5th century Athens and the Hellenistic period, and the Roman copies of the sculptures and the temples, and this is beauty. Then again, this is kind of evil to say that, because I love classical Greek beauty and 17th century classical beauty and the neoclassical beauty of the kind we find in Jacques Louis David, I think. It's a French painter of the end of the 18th, early 19th century. It's a revival of classical beauty, and the Renaissance and the Greek ideal of beauty, for me, is superior, and the classical revival of Greek beauty is superior to any other kind of beauty. That's the view of my empirical self. And if I detach myself, a lot of people, at least in the Western world, acknowledge that classical views of Greek beauty are superior, although they do not dare use the word, but by making linguistic detours, they kind of vaguely admit that this type of beauty, the classical in architecture, sculpture, was superior. And then in the realm of thought, if one watches objectively the unfolding of world history in all spheres of life, one is forced to acknowledge that the great majority of the greatest men are white European males of mostly Nordic Western origin. And there are books which have been published, The 100 by Michael Hart, which was a Jewish author, ranking, according to him, the most influential men in history, and the vast majority are white European heterosexual males, and most of them come from England or Scotland or Germany or the Netherlands or America and France also, but mostly the Nordic Western countries and their offshoots. It is not to degrade other, and it's not to say that all whites are great and that non-whites are not great. It would be foolish, but it's simply to look at the unfolding of history and to acknowledge that a vast proportion of the greatest men, who are not always nice persons, but who achieved creative genius or military endeavors or scientific or artistic or intellectual feats and endeavors were Nordic Western Europeans. That's just how things are. And Charles Murray published a book of human accomplishment, and then again in the fields of mathematics, physics, philosophy, chemistry, biology, technology, literature. The overwhelming majority of achievers are Nordic Europeans, and he drew a map, I think, of the core of the creative strength of Europe, which is, as far as I remember, it's a mixture of Eastern France, Western Germany, the Netherlands, Southern England and Scotland maybe, and Northern Italy. It's a geographical area which concentrated the highest quantity of creative minds in artistic, scientific endeavors. Yeah. So then again, I must just acknowledge that this is how things have unfolded in history. And yeah. And then about my empirical self. I know that I am not an Aryan. I am not beautiful. I have not a symmetric face. I have not blonde hair and blue eyes, and I have not the physical characteristic of what I envision to be Aryan beauty. And in the realm of men, I would say Daniel Craig or Tom Hardy and many others, but they are the embodiment of Aryan beauty for men, as I envision it. And I know that I don't look like them. I don't look beautiful, and I look not even strictly European in a way. So I know that my love for Aryan beauty comes from my feeling of lack and degradation and yeah. And in my empirical life, I know that I am not an achiever, and I have not the strength and the moral courage of the European men that I admire. So I understand vaguely speculative logic, and this is probably the reason why I admire them so much, is because they are what I am not, and they are what I wished I were. I wish that I had the strength and the moral character of the European archetype as I envision it, but I also understand that to be European in character as I envision it is to have the strength to bear the burden of the tragic aspect of existence, because the way I envision it, a real European, maybe that's a delusion, but the great European men had a sense of the tragic of existence, and they remained stoic in the face of calamity and catastrophe, and this is where they drew their moral strength. And I'm not saying that only Europeans can do that, because strength and moral character are universal, and anyone can be strong in the face of hardships. But the way that my empirical self envision European character, it is this ability to remain strong against hardships and not to complain, and this gives a sense of seriousness and dignity, and to accept suffering without complaint. That's how I envision the aristocratic mindset of Europeans, and I know that this is what I am not, and I understand that this is because this is what I am not that I admire it so much. Yeah. And about the history of the white race, we find so much violence in the history of the white race. As an empirical individual, I am quite ignorant in the history of Africa and Asia and South America before Columbus, so I couldn't speak much, but I know vaguely the major outlines of European history. And think about ancient Greece. The Spartans, the Athenians, the Thebans, the Corinthians, and all the Greek city-states of the western part of modern Anatolia, which were Eastern Greeks in relation to Athens, but they were on the west coast of modern Turkey and Anatolia. They produced artistic, scientific, military achievements worthy of being eternally admired. But when we adopt a European view on Greek history, one feels suffering, because if they had not waged war against one another, Athens and Sparta, they would not have self-destruct. And it is tragic when one loves, but then again one understands that without this tragic moment history would not have unfolded. And when one look at the history of the Roman Republic, it's self-destruction and self-annihilation which brought about the fall of the Roman Republic, and it is internal decay which brought about the fall of the Roman Empire and the conquest by the Germanic tribes. And from what I know broadly about the history of Europe, the European countries, if one might speak of countries in the period of the fall of the Roman Empire, the territories were dominated by Germanic aristocracies. And if one adopts an objective viewpoint, one must be forced to acknowledge that the history of Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire has been dominated by Germanic peoples. There were Germanic aristocracies in Spain, probably in Portugal also, in northern Italy, in France. France owes its name to a Germanic tribe, and the French aristocracy was Germanic for a very long time. And the northern part of France was Germanic. The Netherlands, Belgium, Scandinavia, Germany, England and Scotland, and there were Germanic aristocracies ruling and dominating the life of Eastern Europe, partly in Russia even. There were Vikings in Russia and in Romania and Bulgaria, and there were German minorities who dominated partly the political life of these countries. So I am not an Aryan individual, but if I look with detachment, I must acknowledge that the political, artistic, scientific life of Europe has been dominated by predominantly Nordic, Western, not geographically, but sociobiologically, Nordic Western men. And the European offshoots, Canada, the United States of America, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, they were populated by predominantly Nordic Western Europeans. That's a fact. And they came to dominate the political and economic life and to become agents of political change in the world for the past 200 years. That's how things are. And in my intellectual development as an empirical individual, I have gone through the path of the negative, and I'm still on this negative path. And the vast majority of the men that I have admired during this negative process of becoming conscious of myself were Europeans. I made a video of the men who I have admired the most, and they were not only Europeans and Nordic Western Europeans, but mostly, overwhelmingly. I also admired Jewish authors like Michael Levine for his honesty, writing about race and feminism, Michael Hart for his intelligence and his honesty in writing about human history. I have admired Murray Rothbard and Ayn Rand. I have had great love for this overwhelming character that she was, and I admired Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard and Spinoza. And for me, Murray Rothbard and Spinoza were Jewish Aryans. They were so over the top that they had an Aryan personality, although they were Jews. And I have admired Otto Weininger also, and some other Jews. And in my negative path, the Jews that I have admired were self-hating Jews, partly, or they did not necessarily hated themselves as Jews, but they embraced a pro-European or pro-white view, and that's why I admire them. So the history of the white race is full of creative achievements, but also of violence. And there has been so much violence between the various European tribes or peoples or nations. And the Europeans have been the main agents of world historical change. Even Hegel says that there was the Greek and the Roman and then the Germanic Volkgeist who brought about historical change and progress, but progress can only occur by negating the current state of being, so it's a negative movement also. And the Europeans have been in a constant state of war and conflict among one another and conflict against the rest of the world, and they have brought negativity into the world. I am fully aware of that, and they have inflicted suffering more than any other people. But at the same time, they have, I hate to say it, but it's part of the truth, they have brought progress, because the demographic explosion that we witnessed for the past 2 centuries would have been unthinkable and impossible without white, Western, Nordic science and medicine and care. And so there's this ambiguity that the Europeans are the cause of negativity and violence and suffering, but at the same time they bring progress. And the anti-white advocates, which I understand, because the Europeans and the white brought negativity, and negativity brings its own opposite, so it's logical to oppose the negative by being oneself negative, and by this asserting a positive identity or assertion. The black or Asian or Muslim or African, whatever, who oppose white supremacy, they use white technology, not white technology, because technology does not belong to white, but a technology which was the result of the conceptual and historical development of Western Nordic science and technology, and it's complicated. And my empirical self loves Europe in this Nordic, Western, Germanic type of vision more than anything else, which is evil, because it means to leave aside everything else, precisely everything which is not Europe. But at the same time, I hate Europe, and I don't really hate, but I am angry against Europe and against myself, because Europe, as I envision it, represents everything that I am not, and it constantly reminds me of my own mediocrity and my own failure and my own wickedness. So I am in a dialectical, schizophrenic relationship with Europe, and I have traveled the path of white identity, And I know that white advocates fantasize about Eastern Europe and Russia because it's still a predominantly white country, but the dialectical irony of world history is that there is another war between white Europeans. And the white race is the historical agent of progress, but also of negativity and violence and death, but also knowledge and love, because romantic love is predominantly expressed in the European tradition. So Europeans are such a dialectical people, I would say. They hate one another and they are at war with one another constantly, but at the same time they express knowledge and love and art and philosophy and truth. And the modern white liberal type of mankind is such a weird and strange figure of consciousness. It's a self-hating whites. They hate themselves. No other people has such a self-negative relationship to itself. And the more they are intelligent and beautiful and Nordic European, the more they hate themselves. And yeah. So the white race is a complicated entity. And I will conclude by saying that my empirical self loves Europe passionately, and I've made videos to explain that passionate love involves suffering and pain and madness. But I love Europe, and I hate Europe because Europe is everything that I am not. So, like I said, Europe reminds me of my own mediocrity, and I hate being reminded of my own mediocrity, and that's complicated. But yeah.